Hello, this is the synopsis for Chapter 1 of the macroeconomics book for Econ 500. So as you know, on Moodle, I have notes for each chapter, and you'll also will have a recorded synopsis to tell you what to focus on and the main takeaways for each chapter. So this is Chapter 1. So when you're reading Chapter 1, you will find that the main point of Chapter 1 is why are some nations rich and some nations poor? So economists have been trying to figure this out for years, why some nations are rich and some nations are poor. And so at first they thought that natural resources played a big part in the income disparity of nations. But then they realized that that really isn't a valid reason, because if you think about Russia, for example, Russia has a lot of natural resources, but they really they're not wealthy as a nation. They're poor among nations. And then if you look at companies like Switzerland really doesn't have any natural resources to speak of, and they're very wealthy. Same thing with Hong Kong. So they found that natural resources really plays a small part in whether or not nations are rich or poor. They found that the most important element, or the most important deciding factor of whether a nation is going to be rich or poor are the political and the legal institutions. So if you basically have if you have a country that has strong political and legal institutions, a strong rule of law, then that leads to economic political stability and secure property rights. If there's secure property rights, in other words, if people know that their property rights are going to be protected, then they're more inclined to invest, and companies are more inclined to invest to make investments in that country. So if a country is politically stable, has secure property rights, that encourages long-term investment. And long-term investment means improvements to land and improvements to capital, which leads to growth. That leads to increased living standards. So the common law system, we basically have two types of systems. We have in the world, we have the common law system, which that's the English system. And the English system, or the common law system, has stronger property rights. It's better at enforcing contracts, and it limits the role of government. This tends to lead to a stronger rule of law, more secure property rights, and political stability. So if you think about countries that were in the British Empire, those under the common law system, those countries have tended to be more successful and richer countries, versus the civil law system. That is like the French system is civil law. The civil law system has a strong centralized government, so they're more likely to have unpredictable changes in the rules of the game. Therefore, people are reluctant to make long-term investments. That's going to result in slower growth and a lower standard of living compared to the common law system. So the main factor for whether nations are rich or poor, they found, tended to be political and legal institutions. Natural resources is just a small part. They also found that disease played a role. So if you think about when during the colonization period, if the English, say, came to a country where there was a tropical climate and disease was prevalent, there was really no incentive to promote democratic institutions and long-term property rights. So in other words, if it's tropical climate and disease was prevalent, they weren't really going to be able to settle there. So they had more of an extractive. It was an extractive kind of philosophy versus an inclusive philosophy. So they would just go to that particular country and just extract all the gold, silver, the English did it, the Spanish did it, Spaniards did it. So it was more of an extractive philosophy. So those countries really, they've suffered as a result of that, and they haven't prospered. So if you think about some, Caribbean countries or South American countries, Mexico, for example, versus the U.S. When the English came to the U.S., the climate was not tropical. You could inhabit the U.S., and so they ended up staying here. So disease plays a role too. So make sure you read about that. So also read the article that is on Moodle. It is this article: Why are some countries rich and some countries poor? Well, this they talk about some of the same things that are in chapter 1, but they also mention some other reasons. And so particularly on page 2, make sure that you read through this and be able to identify some other reasons that they list in this article that indicate why some countries are rich and some countries are poor. And they talk about South Korea, for example. And so I want you to read it to find the answers on your own, but there's a couple more reasons that are pointed out in this article regarding the disparity of why some countries are rich and some countries are poor. Okay, so those are the main takeaways for chapter 1. And take care, and I will be posting the rest of the videos and uploading those on Moodle shortly.